to another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us. This week we focus on the results of the National Grade 6 Assessment. That's a 2013 National Grade 6 Assessment. And of course, with me to help discuss those results and whether or not he's satisfied is Mr. David Granger, Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
First of all, Mr. Granger, there are persons in our society who are saying that, yes, we've seen the front pages and the headlines celebrating the children who would have done exceedingly well in this year's National Grade 6 Assessment. However, on the other half, there are some persons who are definitely not satisfied and, they believe that much more needs to be done and we need to see our young people doing much better regarding school and regarding these exams. First of all, I know you've already made some sentiments that you're not necessarily satisfied with the results. What do you believe the problem is?
Well, first of all, I would like to join by congratulating the persons, the children who've done very well. It's, it is certainly a good performance on their part, and I think they've opened the gates to a long and satisfying academic as well as occupational career. So well done, and I don't think we can take that away from them. They had to work hard, and of course their parents had to prepare them. Now, all of us have had to pass through that hurdle or jump over that hurdle. We used to call it common entrance, secondary school entrance examination, that was National Grade 6, whatever name it is. There is a hurdle, a narrow gateway that you must pass through, leaving primary to go into secondary. And it's critical because if there's a slip up there, it means that the child will probably be disadvantaged. And that is my deep concern. I haven't looked at the results in any detail. The results have to be examined, but we can discuss that later. I am concerned about the disadvantage that this single event, which of course you call it an assessment because there are 3 grades, as you know, and the actual examination, which was written in around Easter time, is only 85%, but you have previous grades which I think make up the other 15% to give you the 100% of the total. But it is a matter of 6 or sticks. If people slip up because they're slow, because they're disoriented, or any other problem, it means that the entire academic future could be jeopardized. And I think as a result of that, we can create something which I call academic apartheid. Now, the problem is, from what I've seen, I've been around this country, I've been into all of the regions, campaigning and visiting and so on. Many of the schools which were built 80 or 90 years ago, by the Christians particularly, Methodist schools, Presbyterian schools, Anglican schools, Catholic schools, are very old. They don't have good playing facilities, they don't have classroom facilities, they don't have laboratory facilities. And I think the level of preparation in those schools is not the best. As a result, people have to go to lessons. And parents who can afford lessons, who can afford good tutors, will be able to see the results in their children. And parents who cannot afford tutors will end up seeing their children achieve very low grades at this great National Grade 6 assessment. Now that's one problem. I'm sorry to give you such a long answer, but the other problem, of course, is that 17,000 children might have written the examination, or close to that figure. But when we look at the results in the newspaper, we can hardly account for 1,000. Most of the children go to schools which are not regarded as being satisfactory. There are only 6 top schools, what they call the 6 sisters. Queens, everybody knows Queens College, St. Stanislaus College, St. Rose's, St. Joseph's, Bishop's High School, and President's College. Now, there used to be another half a dozen multilateral schools, Anna Regina, Bijgeval, Bladen Hall, New Amsterdam, Rijnveld, Wismar. But once you start getting beyond those 6 or beyond the 12 schools, you go into schools which are of a very low grade. Some of them are basically primary top, some of them have been converted primary schools, and there are no playgrounds, there are no laboratories, there are no libraries. So the point I'm making is that this National Grade 6, instead of putting more children into a successful secondary career, are actually dividing the school population into people who are likely to continue to be good and others who are likely to continue to be poor.
I'm happy you mentioned that, and it's quite interesting because you mentioned what you call the six sisters, and then you could probably include 6 more and you get probably 12 top schools. But my question is, don't you think that if we probably invest more in terms of training, that we can bring the other schools not necessarily exactly on par with those 6 sisters or the 12 top schools, but can we improve the conditions? Because I once heard someone say too that it's not necessarily where you go, but what you do when you go there. Can we just lift the standards of those schools?
That's an interesting point, Malaika. Another phenomenon that we need to take on board, apart from the 6 sisters, is the rise of faith-based schools and private schools. That is at both primary and secondary level. If we look at the results, you'll see that I think maybe 40 or 50% of the children who did well at the National Grade 6 actually came out of private schools, like Mays, and some of them are from religious schools. For example, the Isa Islamic Academy and school, and they'll probably be going into faith-based secondary schools or private secondary schools. So this would deepen the apartheid, because maybe 20 years ago there was no Isa Islamic school. There's nothing wrong with faith-based schools. I mean, many persons living today, who went to primary schools in the 50s and 60s would have gone to faith schools. I mean, I went to an Anglican school, a Presbyterian school, a Moravian school, and a Catholic school, all at primary level. And these schools used to be run by representatives of the clergy of those denominations. Now what we have is a new harvest of faith-based schools, and you find people wearing uniforms which are maybe in accordance with their faith. For example, it's easy to recognize children going to Islamic schools because the girls wear a certain dress and the boys might be dressed differently, but you can recognize girls who go to these religious schools, Hindu or Islamic schools. I sincerely hope that they do not contribute to creating any more division, that they continue to be integrative. Of course, a Christian might hesitate to send a child to a Hindu school. Similarly, a Hindu might hesitate to send his or her child to a Christian school. I see education as being an integrative force in which we all as Guyanese should have a common curriculum and a common education. So the difficulty is that I think the major fault line is not necessarily religious anymore. It is also religion compounded by poverty, compounded by academic aptitude. Now, let me mention something else as we're on this topic, because when you look at the results, I think the best student in the country got about 548. The best student in the entire Potaro-Siparuni region got about 469. It is really like 80 points below the best national grade, and with that score, you have a whole region, and you have several other large areas where no student would have qualified to go into the big six, the Six Sisters. And that is something we have to worry about, because it means that the state education system is defective or even dysfunctional. That's a big problem for me. And that's going to be a big problem along, for years to come.
Brigadier, when we get the results and we see the big splashes and read about the big headlines about who got what, the top students, celebrating the top students, we never seem to, well, I should say the Ministry of Education never seem to publicly expose what is really happening underneath. Is it that the ministry or government is purposely hiding those results from our nation? Because it's proof that we are not where we should be regarding our children's education.
Now, you'll have to ask the minister if she's hiding anything. I can't say if she's hiding. What I can say is, as a parliamentarian, I am dissatisfied with the responsiveness of the government, and we will use our position in the National Assembly to demand reports of those results, because we're not satisfied with the way they pass information. We have to make decisions. We have to meet our constituents and represent their interests. And what we're not seeing, apart from the results, what we're not seeing is the analysis. And I'm interested in analysis because I know I can say with certainty that up to a couple of years ago, I haven't seen the report for 2012, about half the children who wrote the examination, the National Grade 6, bearing in mind that it's cumulative, that they would have been, from 2, 4, and 6, failed everything. There are 4 subjects, and about half of the children failed every single thing, which means that out of the 70,000, we were talking about, at least, 8,500 failing everything, which means, in theory, they're not equipped even to enter secondary school. That is a very serious matter, and needless to say, students in the hinterland region suffer most. And another problem that I must mention, that I mentioned earlier when you raised the matter, is that many of the hinterland dwellers will be confined to relatively inferior secondary schools. I was told of an incident in the Upper Mazaruni, where some students actually qualified, some students in a place called Jawala, that is very far from here. They got grades which would have qualified them to enter the Waramanang Secondary School, which is the main secondary school in the Upper Mazaruni, in the Middle Mazaruni. But they were told they had no vacancies, and they were told they would have to stay in their very villages and attend what they call primary tops. And the children broke down in tears. They started to cry. What it means is that there are not sufficient places in secondary schools in the hinterland. And of course, we can go back to that terrible picture that we saw a few weeks ago with the children at Paramakatoy, Kato, is it? Actually fetching logs. And these are children who should be in the classroom, they are fetching logs. So the situation in some areas is grim, is dire. And we feel that the entire state educational system is dysfunctional. We've got about 2,500 Indian children attending these schools, and many of the schools are plagued with very serious problems.
I want to focus on teachers a bit. Do we have enough qualified persons to teach in the primary, in our primary school, the primary level?
Well, that is another area of concern. At one stage, I know that the government is working towards reducing the amount of unqualified, and untrained. They're really two categories. But some people have the ability to combine both categories, that they're both unqualified and untrained. Some people are qualified but not trained. There are not enough. They are not enough. Partnership for National Unity, as you could recall, at least during my campaign, I promised that the teaching profession would be the best paid profession in the state sector. I have made no apologies for that because I felt that we are in a state of emergency as far as education is concerned, and I wanted to attract the best into the teaching profession. The only way you can do it is by paying people better. I've campaigned, in North America, and I've met teachers who want to come back home, but they are very happy to continue to leave Guyana and go to other countries. I remember at my own graduation at the University of Guyana, I was sitting next to somebody who virtually said, he's got his diplomas in one hand, he's got a Caribbean Airlines ticket to the Bahamas in the other hand. He said, David, by Monday I'm gone. And he was literally just graduating. He said, I can't stay here. And we know that people from Botswana have come down here and recruited teachers, people from Belize, people from Barbados, people from Bahamas. Our best teachers are going. And we need to do more to keep our teachers here. Now, to come back to your question, no, we do not have sufficient trained teachers. Every single teacher, in my view, in my philosophy, in my outlook, must be a university graduate, even if that person is teaching at nursery level, primary level. You don't give people poor teachers, poor quality teachers. You don't send the unqualified or the most troublesome teachers to the hinterland. You always give the children the best. And we must treat the teaching profession better. I do not know the exact score now. It used to be, I think, about 40 or 50% untrained. I don't know if it has improved, but even if it's 10%, we must make sure that every teacher who stands up in front of a class is trained. Now, there's another problem. It's not just a matter of academic training, it's a matter of being able to purvey certain values and standards. Because you would be surprised that even among qualified teachers, there's a very high rate of dismissal by the Teaching Service Commission for malpractice, for misconduct. A lot of the misconduct is sexual misconduct. Teachers who sexually exploit the young students. I think up to this week there's a report of one in the Pataro-Siparuni region, which you might have read about. And many teachers go into the classrooms and they sexually exploit the children who are being placed in their charge. It means that something is wrong with the quality of training, quality of education they themselves get at Cyril Party College of Education. So both from an educational and a moral point of view, there are not enough persons standing up in front of those classes of students who can produce the quality of graduate we need to become good citizens.
I always like to do a comparison, and you mentioned just a few moments ago that you believe that every teacher should be a university graduate. Now, I just want to compare modern day teachings, modern day schoolings to that of, I like to call it maybe the era before I came here.
You're very kind.
Now, it's a fact that not only in Guyana, we have universities, more universities around the world, and yet we hear people saying that, look, the education system back then was much better than it is now. Why is it that even though now it's in modern time, we seem to be in a worse situation than, we were before now?
Well, it's a great paradox, and I can only say that, number one, is that a lot of the physical infrastructure that was built by the churches in the 30s and 40s is now decaying. So what was new has become old and dysfunctional. And number two, persons went into teaching because other professions were close to them. before independence, it was very difficult for persons of certain ethnic groups, particularly Africans, Indians, Amerindians, to get into some professions. And, for example, they couldn't get in to work at some banks. Doors were closed to them. I know it's not a secret. I'm not being racial or racist. I'm just stating a matter of fact. And because of that, a lot of them went into the teaching profession. You can see it now that there might be a predominance of, Indians, Amerindians, and Africans in the teaching profession because they couldn't get into other professions. And so that was what happened at that time. But what took place later on, as mobility improved, people were able to go into other professions, so the teaching profession wasn't attractive any longer. And of course, it's badly paid anyway. So nobody wanted to become a teacher. They wanted to do something else. But most of all, the possibilities for migration were opened, and it was easier to migrate. And people say, hey, I'm going to Bahamas. And that is what happened. Whereas very committed persons might have been prepared to stay in the village in the 1950s and 60s to become a head teacher. In the 1990s, people were saying, look, I prefer to go to the Bahamas or to Belize or Botswana. So you have to look at the social factors which were taking place and also the economic factors. I've known, and I'm sure you've known, a lot of persons who, if they had remained in Guyana, would not have been doing so well. And quite frankly, even in nursing and other professions, people leave and go overseas and then send back, money. They send back remittances. They send for their families. They come here on holidays, and everybody said, "Well, you and I, we're at university together. We were at Civil Potter College together. How come you're doing so well?" He said, "Well, this is what I get paid." He said, "Oh, well, I want to go too." So it is a cumulative process. It's people see others doing well and they want to go overseas and do well. Nursing and teaching professions have been hard hit by migration. So I think that is one of the problems, and we need to understand the world we live in and treat our training teachers better. A training teacher up to last year, I don't know if it's changed, up to the last quarter of last year, I think might have been getting like $7,500 a month stipend. And they might have been getting meals and so on in training college, but they need to provide training aids and do all sorts of things. And they said, this is impossible. I personally, when I addressed the graduation, the Sierra Potter College of Education graduation, and I said, look, you've got to change this, you've got to double it, give training teachers a more comfortable stipend so that they'll be more committed to the profession. But when they're living hand to mouth, you alienate and marginalize them rather than, make them more committed.
Sir, do you plan to make any, formal moves as it relates to engaging the education minister on, not only the national grade 6 assessment results, but the next thing we'll probably be talking about regarding education is the CXC results. Are you planning on engaging the minister anytime soon to discuss, where do we go from here? How do we improve our children's education future?
The People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, I think, has a certain mindset, and it is not receptive to ideas about improvement of anything. These are people who actually voted against measures. For example, even last night in the National Assembly, I introduced a motion to investigate the death of 3 children. Well, it actually turned out to be more than 3 children, probably a dozen children. And they haven't even disclosed the names of the person who died. But everything, every measure that you bring before the National Assembly that does not seem to praise or please the PPP, they are inclined to vote against. Coming back to education, I cannot believe that the Minister of Education is unaware of the problems, in the system. These have been brought to our attention over and over again, and we will engage the ministry through the National Assembly. But face-to-face negotiations, I don't think that is going to be beneficial. But I think we need to use the National Assembly floor to ensure that changes are brought about in the education system. Right now, as I said, the education system is dysfunctional for a large part of our population. I've always said there is one dropout per hour from the primary and secondary schools combined. We know that only about 25% of the students at secondary school matriculate. That means they get a full set of CSEC subjects, including English and mathematics. We know that the failure rates for mathematics and English at CSEC are very low. They're all under 50%. And we know that even at the national grade 6 level where we started, the 4 subjects, half of the students writing those examinations fail everything. So these are not matters that we can ignore, and a Partnership for National Unity will continue to struggle to bring these matters to the attention of the administration and demand that there be changes. Our children are suffering terribly because of this education system.
I must ask though, because it always comes back to how can we help, and you did say that you continue to work in the National Assembly, and I know you visit regions, but do you plan to make any possible visits, if probably not in Georgetown, in the regions, regarding this particular matter? And apart from that, really and truly, what can you do to show the Guyanese people that, look, we are concerned, we are caring, we want your child or your children to have a better education? Well,
charity begins at home. Within the Guyana Youth and Student Movement and the People's National Congress Reform, we have started a program based on what I call the, a BST. It's called BST, but we intend to we have started taking children from the national grade 6 level and giving them bursaries to encourage them throughout the secondary level. We were also working with at literacy, person in the pre-NGSA level. We've declared 2013 Year for Youth, and we feel that one of the most important qualities or values that we can impart to youth is the value of education. And that is what we're going to be doing, and we've been encouraging private citizens to get involved in education. I haven't given up on the state system, but I think that all of the communities that I speak with will be told that, look, don't rely on the state, try to help students to get to school, get them books, and get them transport to get to school. So it is a collective effort.
Okay, before we wrap up, I do remember indeed that you had taken on that venture, the bursary awards, but I know sometimes when these things start, especially if it's not necessarily supported by government, it's probably difficult to keep it going financially. So my question basically is that you do plan to continue what you would have started in, I think it was 2012.
That's correct. It's going on. The BEST is the best system. It's working.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
It's always a pleasure.
This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.